Monster Hunter World Iceborne's Endgame can be a challenge for the best of hunters out there, but with the right weapons and builds, even endgame tasks can easily be achieved. I'm Darcblade and we're back with even more amazing builds for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. In this episode we're going to take a look at endgame builds for the Insect Glaive. The Insect Glaive is a fast, highly manoeuvrable weapon, and can be divided into two parts. You have the glaive aspect and the kinsect aspect, both of them working in unison to create a very unique weapon. It's also a weapon that can make use of airborne strategies, allowing a hunter to stay airborne for long periods of time while dealing damage to a monster. On top of this, thanks to the manoeuvrability as well as the airborne aspects, this weapon can be quite defensive as you're able to stay out of the way of monster attacks. The builds I use tend to highlight and focus on all of these aspects to bring you a variety of different ways to use the Insect Glaive. But a disclaimer for this series though, these builds are aimed for endgame hunters who have completed the main story and have access to most the armors and jewels in the game. This series also focuses on builds pre-Safi'Jiiva. But if you do not have the gear or jewels that I showed in this video, you can always swap out jewels here and there to what you have available to you. But anyway, the first build I use is the Master's Touch Insect Glaive build. This is a straightforward DPS build making use of the Master's Touch skill to minimise sharpness gauge management. So for this build you'll need the Kaiser Crown Beta, the Rex Royal Male Beta, Kaiser Van Braces Beta, Kaiser Coil Beta, and the Garuga Grease Beta. I'm also using a Handicraft Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Metal Mangler, which is the Rajang Insect Glaive. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for a defense increase augmentation. When it comes to the kinsects, I'm not going to go into too much details here about the kinsects as these are down to pretty much personal preference, although I will say having a fast kinsect is normally optimal. Also when it comes to the specialist tools, the same applies, these are pretty much down to personal preference. As for your jewels, you've got a fair few to play around with here, to which I've gone for Tenderizer jewels for weakness exploit, critical jewels for the crit boost skill, a throttle jewel for the latent power skill, flight jewels for the airborne skill, attack jewels for the attack boost skill, expert jewels for some critical eye, vitality jewels for the health boost skill, enhancer jewels for the power prolonger skill, and then finally the jewels on the mantles I've gone for protection and throttle jewels. So, if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 998 with white sharpness. You have 40% base affinity, which can be 100% thanks to the buffs from weakness exploit combined with latent power. You have a thunder rating of 90%, and you'll have a blunt boost for your kinsect. As for your defense, you have a decent defense of 938 that is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. As for the skills, you have Critical Eye level 7. Critical Eye is a skill that increases your base affinity. Attack Boost level 4, increasing the raw attack of the weapon we're using, and at level 4 or above gives us a bonus 5% extra affinity. You have Handicraft level 4, increasing the sharpness of the weapon we're using. Unfortunately, the Rajang Insect Glaive does need some handicraft in order to get to white sharpness. Anyway, you also have Health Boost level 3, allowing us to get our health to that maximum of 200. You have Crit Boost level 3. Crit Boost is a skill that increases the damage of our hits when they crit a monster, but this damage only applies to the raw portion of an attack. Imagine an attack being divided into two parts, one the raw portion, the attack portion, and the other the elemental or ailment portion. So basically it increases the attack portion, it does nothing for the elemental side of things. Anyway, you have Weakness Exploit level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity when we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity can be a potential maximum of 50%. You have Power Prolonger level 3, which is a useful quality of life skill for the Insect Glaive. It allows the weapon to stay charged up with the kinsect bonuses for longer periods of time. You have Latent Power level 3, which can be potentially level 5 when we're wearing our mantles. This is something to be aware of. Latent Power basically increases our affinity as well as reducing our stamina consumption, which is good for when we are airborne, after we've been fighting a monster for a set amount of time, or we've taken a set amount of damage from said monster. So, when you notice Latent Power is kicked in, put on the mantle to ensure you get the level 5 bonus instead of just level 3. But anyway, you have Blast Attack level 2. This is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, and it's not really useful on this build as we're not using a blast weapon. If we were, it would simply increase the blast rating and effectiveness of the ailment. Anyway, you have Heat Guard level 1, another byproduct, but is useful. It prevents any environmental damage when we're in hot areas such as the lava zones in the Guiding Lands or Elder's Recess. You have Airborne level 1, which increases our damage when we are airborne. And then finally for the skills, when you're wearing one of our mantles, you'll also have Divine Blessing level 2, which gives us a chance of taking less damage when we take a hit from a monster. Now, as for the set bonuses, you only have one, which is Teostra's Technique, Master's Touch, preventing any sharpness loss when we crit a monster. And as this build has quite high affinity, especially thanks to weakness exploit and when latent power is in effect, it means that we should see minimum sharpness loss with this build. So there we have it. As you can see, it is a pretty straightforward DPS build that makes use of the Master's Touch set bonus. It does have a few quality of life skills added to it, but on the whole this one's focused on DPS. But every build out there has pros and cons. The biggest pros for this build is its damage output. Whilst the Insect Glaive may not be the highest DPS weapon out there, with this build having high affinity and associated DPS skills, it means that the damage is fairly high. On top of that, it's a build that doesn't really have to worry about sharpness loss. This is all thanks to the Master's Touch set bonus, even though our base value is only 40%, thanks to the other associated affinity based skills such as weakness exploit and latent power, we should still see minimum sharpness loss. And on top of that, finally, this build does come with a few quality of life skills, making a hunt feel a little bit more easier thanks to health boost, giving us that extra health, and more importantly, power prolonger, which definitely helps when it comes to managing our kinsect buffs. But there are cons to every build. The biggest con for this build is unfortunately it's a jewel heavy build, requiring some rare jewels that maybe not everyone has access to. And the final con, which is more really a minor one that applies to the weapon, which is that the Rajang Insect Glaive comes with negative affinity, meaning that we've had to waste skills, augmentations and more to get the affinity to the point where it doesn't impact the build. But regardless, this is a powerful build, and in some respects it can be made even stronger. If you wanted to drop the Power Prolonger skill, for example, you could implement peak performance if you are more confident with your playstyle, which will increase this build's DPS even more so. But regardless, this is one of my go-to Insect Glaive builds thanks to its functionality and DPS output. Which brings us on to our next build, which is the Quality of Life build. This build is all about quality of life, implementing quality of life skills such as earplugs and stamina cap up to make hunts feel a little bit more easier than they are. It does have some DPS options, so it should still allow you to take hunts on quite effectively. So for this build you'll need the Fulgor Helm Beta, the Ruinous Mel Beta, Ruinous Vambraces Beta, the Fulgor Coil Beta and the Garuga Greaves Beta. I'm also using an Earplugs Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Ruinous Catastrophe, which is the Ruina Nergigante Insect Glaive. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an elemental up augmentation, although this last one is down to personal preference. As for the jewels, you've got a few to play around with here, to which I've gone for critical jewels for the crit boost skill, tenderizer jewels for the weakness exploit skill, earplug jewels to max out the earplug skill, vitality jewels for health boost, challenger jewels for the agitator skill, attack jewels for attack boost, a sharp jewel for protected polish. This is coupled with a hard enduring jewel for the item prolonger skill, and then the jewels on the mantles I've simply gone for expert jewels for critical eye, as well as a flight jewel for the airborne skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 200 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 939 with maxed out white sharpness. You have 25% base affinity, which can be higher, potentially getting to 100% so long as you're taking into account weakness exploit, the agitator buff being active, and you're wearing your mantles that increase the critical eye. You have a dragon rating of 210 with high elder seal, and you'll have a sever boost for your kinsect bonus. As for your defense, you have an okay defense of 887, that is strong against fire, neutral against thunder, but a little bit weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you have a fair few. First is earplugs at level 5. This allows us to ignore all monster roars, preventing any loss of character when a monster decides to bellow at you. This also means that the monster will leave itself open to your attacks or give you a chance to retreat and heal. You'll also have Agitator level 5. This is a buff that kicks in when a monster becomes enraged, increasing the raw attack of a build as well as the affinity. You'll have Attack Boost at level 4, Item Prolonger at level 3. Item Prolonger is a skill that allows certain items and buffs to remain active for longer periods, and this has been taken mainly in unison with Protected Polish, which we'll talk about in a minute. You have Health Boost level 3, Critical Boost level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3, Critical Eye level 2, which can be potentially level 5 when we're wearing our mantles. You have Stamina Surge level 2, this is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it's still useful. Stamina Surge basically allows us to restore our stamina at a quicker pace. You have Protected Polish level 1, which is a buff that we can apply to our sharpness gauge after we sharpen our weapon, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. And this duration of time is increased even more thanks to Item Prolonger. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Airborne at level 1, increasing the damage whilst we're in the air. As for the set bonuses, you have two of them. First of all is the Anjanath Dominance Stamina Cap Up, allowing our stamina to get from a maximum of 150 to a maximum of 200, ultimately increasing how long we can stay in the air. And then finally you'll have Nergigante's Ambition, Hasten Recovery, allowing us to restore our health when we're attacking a monster, and this does work in unison with the health regen augmentation. So it gives us some health regen options. So there you have it. As you can see, it is a little bit of a comfy build, and in some respects an all-round build. Not focusing in any one area per se, but ultimately aiming for hunters to go on comfortable hunts. But of course there are pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is it's an all-round build, making use of various quality of life skills as well as offensive and DPS skills. It should make hunts feel easier than they are. On top of that is a build that can stay airborne for longer. This is all thanks to the stamina cap up set bonus, giving us more stamina to work with. And then the final major pro for this build is the earplug skill, allowing us to ignore monster roars, preventing any loss of character. But there are cons. The two biggest cons for this build include that the build has no handicraft, meaning that if you did want to swap the weapon out, you could only really work with weapons that didn't really require any handicraft. And the other con, which is more of a fault of mine, which is that the airborne skill isn't built into the build, it's instead in the mantles. To be honest, with this build's ability to stay in the air for longer, you're better off putting the airborne skill via the flight jewel somewhere else. So it's a mistake that I acknowledge and I would potentially change. You could, if you wanted to, swap out the hard enduring jewel and drop in item prolonger altogether if you so wish, and put the flight and expert jewels in its place, as the weapon we're using has maxed out white sharpness anyway. Regardless, like I've been harking on, this build is very comfy to use and should ultimately make hunts feel a little bit more easier than they are. Which brings us on to our next build, which is the True Critical Status build. This is a unique build combining the True Critical Status skill, so it's great for ailment weapons, combined with high survivability that the Golden Rathian armor set gives us. So for this build you'll need the Golden Loon Helm Beta, Golden Loon Mail Beta, Shara Ishvalda Braces Beta, the Golden Loon Coil Beta and Golden Loon Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Handicraft Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Soulfire Reach Sticks. This has an health regen augmentation, affinity increase augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for a status effect up augmentation. As for the jewels, you've got a few to play around with, to which I've gone for expert jewels for some critical eye, a critical jewel to max out crit boost, blast jewels to max out the blast attack of this build, tenderizer jewels for weakness exploit, a flight jewel for the expert skill, a sharp jewel for protective polish, vitality jewels for health boost, and you have a few extra jewels to play around with, to which I've gone for handicraft jewels for some extra sharpness, a phoenix jewel for the coalescence skill, and crisis jewel for the resuscitate skill. As for the jewels on the mantles, I've simply gone for expert jewels and challenger jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 775 with purple sharpness. You have 40% base affinity, which can be 90% so long as we're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have a blast rating of 360 with a speed boost as our kinsect bonus. You also have a very strong defense of 981 that is strong against dragon and fire, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you have Handicraft level 5, Divine Blessing at level 5. Divine Blessing can normally only get to level 3, but thanks to the armor we're wearing, it can get to that maximum of level 5, greatly increasing the chance of taking less damage when we take a hit from a monster. You have Blast Attack level 4, increasing the blast rating and build-up of the ailment. You have Critical Eye level 4, which can be potentially level 6 when we're wearing our mantles. You have Health Boost level 3, Critical Boost level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3, Airborne level 1, Resuscitate level 1. Resuscitate is a skill that kicks in when you've been inflicted by some form of blight. When this happens, your hunter will gain improved evasion, as well as a reduction in their stamina depletion. You'll also have Protected Polish level 1, you have Razor Sharp level 1, which is part of the Soulfire Reach Sticks, halving the sharpness loss of the weapon, so this combined with Protected Polish should see that purple sharpness remain active for longer periods. You have Coalescence level 1, which is a buff that kicks in when you remove a blight from your hunter, increasing your raw attack, elemental attack, and ailment attack as a result. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Agitator at level 4. But moving on to the set bonuses, you have two of them, which are all thanks to the Gold Rathian Essence. First of all is Divine Blessing Secret, allowing us to get the Divine Blessing skill from level 3 to a maximum of level 5. And finally, you also have True Critical Status. True Critical Status is a skill that increases the abnormal status effect damage, so in this case blast, when landing a critical hit on a monster. So think of it like crit boost, but for the ailment portion of our attacks. It's been said that when critting a monster, it grants you an additional status buildup of 60%. So there we have it. As you can see, it is a very unique build, making use of the blast element, but on top of that, thanks to Divine Blessing at level 5, it has decent survival options. But of course there are pros and cons to every build. The biggest pros for this build are its damage output through the use of elements and associated skills. True critical status, blast attack combined with crit boost and the other affinity based skills means that your damage output should still be fairly high with this build. On top of that, it's also a build that is very good when it comes to survival. As I've harkened on many times now, Divine Blessing at level 5 really does increase your survivability, and this coupled with health boost means that rarely should you faint unless you're very unlucky and Divine Blessing doesn't kick in. And finally, when it comes to this build does have quite good sharpness management. Thanks to Protective Polish coupled with Razor Sharp, it means that despite only having a small portion of purple sharpness, we should be able to keep it for a decent amount of time when you're on a hunt. But of course there are cons. The biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, although I've praised the sharpness management, one of the cons is unfortunately we only have a sliver of purple sharpness to play around with. And the other con is, unfortunately, we couldn't quite get to that 100% affinity without wearing mantles and such. But there we have it. This is a build for fans who love to use ailments. And as a result, you can pretty much use any weapon you so desire, as long as it has an ailment. You can swap out the weapon for something that uses paralysis or poison if you want, but if you do so, remember to swap out the blast jaws to match whatever ailment you are using. If this is the case, also take into account a monster's ailment weaknesses to best counter them. But if you're going up against a monster that is weak to blast, this is a great build to use that comes with added survivability. Which brings us on to our next build, which is akin to the build we've just talked about, but mirrors it in that it's the true critical element build, making use of elemental weapons for a strong DPS build. So for this you'll need the Silver Soul Helm Beta, the Silver Soul Mail Beta, Silver Soul Braces Beta, Silver Soul Coil Beta and the Garuga Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Wormsbane Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using Deadline. This is the Ebony Adogaron Insect Glaive. This has a health regen augmentation, affinity increase augmentation, and then an elemental up augmentation. As for your jaws, you've got a few to play around with here, to which I've gone for Tenderizer Jaws for weakness exploit, Expert Jaws for critical eye, a Dragon Jaw to max out the dragon attack of this build, Enhancer Jaws again for the Power Prolonger skill, a Flight Jaw for the Airborne skill, and Vitality Jaws for the health boost. The jaws on the mantles are down to personal preference, to which I've gone for Challenger Jaws for the Agitator skill and Sprinter Jaws for the Marathon Runner skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 744 with maxed out white sharpness. You have a base affinity of 65%, which can easily be 100% when you're taking into account weakness exploit. You have an elemental dragon rating of 530 with high Elder Seal, and you'll have a spirit and strength boost as your Kinsect bonus. As for your defense, you have a decent defense of 907, that is strong against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you've only got a few of them. First of all is Dragon Attack at level 6. Dragon Attack increases the dragon rating and damage of this build, and if you wanted to use a different weapon that had a different element, you can replace Dragon Attack to match whatever element you are using by swapping out that Dragon Jewel and of course the Wormsbane Charm. So this could be replaced with Thunder Attack, Ice Attack, whatever you so wish. Anyway, you also have Critical Eye level 6, Windproof level 3. This is a byproduct of the gear. Windproof basically helps us resist moderate wind attacks and effects. You have Health Boost level 3, Critical Boost level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3, Power Prolonger level 3, Slinger Capacity level 3. Slinger Capacity basically allows us to increase how much slinger ammunition we can have at any one point. You have Airborne level 1, Agitator level 4 when we're wearing our mantles, and finally Marathon Runner when we're wearing our mantles. Marathon Runner is a skill that reduces the stamina consumption of stamina consuming moves, such as when we're airborne or sprinting. Finally, when it comes to the set bonuses, you have the Silver Rathalos Essence. First of all is the Slinger Ammo Secret, which allows us to get the Slinger Ammo skill from level 3 to a potential maximum of level 5, although we haven't really utilised it with this build, as the Insect Glaive doesn't rely on the slinger as heavily as other weapons out there. And finally, more importantly, you have True Critical Element, increasing the elemental damage of our attacks when they crit a monster. So, as I mentioned in the previous build, think of it like crit boost but for the elemental portion of our attacks. So there you have it. As you can see, this is a pretty straightforward, strong elemental DPS build, able to take on monsters quite quickly so long as you're countering them with the correct element. But there are pros and cons to every build. The biggest pro to this build is its high elemental DPS output. So long as you're going up against a monster that is weak to whatever element you are using, you should be able to bring them down quite quickly. This is all thanks to the elemental based skills as well as affinity based skills and that true critical element skill. On top of that is a build that comes with a few quality of life skills. Thanks to health boost, power prolonger, slinging capacity and windproof, hunts should feel a little bit easier than they are. And finally, when it comes to the pros, this build is easily customizable and can pretty much get away with using any element in the game. But of course there are cons. The biggest cons for this build is there is no handicraft on this build, meaning that if you're switching weapons to one that can potentially get to purple sharpness, you're going to miss out on that purple sharpness unfortunately unless you swap out some jewels or charms here and there, which could potentially detract from the build's quality of life or damage output. And the other con, which is more a fault of the weapon we're using, which is the raw attack is quite low on this build. But overall it shouldn't matter, as we are looking at an elemental build here, and focusing on the elemental damage is what this one's all about. So there we have it. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward when it comes to an elemental DPS build that I use pre-Safi'Jiiva, and it's still effective so long as you're taking into account a monster's elemental weakness. Which brings us on to our fifth and final build, which is the True Gaia's Veil Guiding Lands build. This build is a quality of life build, making use of the True Gaia's Veil skill, coupled with all the skills that are associated with the Guiding Lands, allowing you to farm the area quite efficiently and effectively. So, for this build, you'll need the Safi'Jiiva Helm Beta, Meld Beta, Braces Beta, Coil Beta, and Grease Beta. I'm also using a Master's Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Ruinous Catastrophe again, which is the Ruiner no Gigante Insect Glaive. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for an elemental up augmentation. And then finally, the mantles are important with this build. You'll need the glider mantle coupled with one of the elemental mantles. This is because we need mantles with short cooldowns and long up times. So next up are the jewels. There are quite a few we need here, so we've gone for Tenderizer jewels for Weakness Exploit, Destroyer jewels for the Part Breaker skill, Maintenance jewels for the Tool Specialist skill, Critical jewels for the Crit Boost skill, Expert jewels for Critical Eye, Vitality jewels for the Health Boost, a Geology jewel for the Geologist skill, a Fortitude jewel for Fortify, Vitality jewels for Health Boost, a Flight jewel for the Airborne skill, a Phoenix jewel for the Coalescence skill, and the jewels on the mantles. These are down to personal preference, to which I've gone for Hard Defense jewels and Sprinter jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 899 with maxed out white sharpness. You have 50% base affinity, which can be 100% so long as you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have a dragon rating of 210 with high Elder Seal, and you'll have the Sever boost as your Kinset bonus with a decent defense of 906 that is strong against thunder, neutral against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. As for the skills, you have a few of them. First of all is Critical Eye at level 7, you have Health Boost at level 3, Critical Boost at level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3, Part Breaker at level 3. Part Breaker is an essential skill for the Guiding Lands as it allows us to break monster body parts more easily, ultimately allowing us to also break off more monster materials from them, allowing us to loot them. You have Coalescence level 3, which greatly increases our raw attack, elemental and element attack when we remove a blight from our hunter. You have Recovery up level 2, a byproduct of the gear we're wearing, but allows us to restore more health through healing methods such as drinking potions. You have Tool Specialist level 2, which reduces the cooldown on our specialist tools, and with Tool Specialist at level 2 it means that the Glider Mantle and Fireproof Mantle, one of them should always be off cooldown for the entirety of a hunt. Anyway, you'll have Defense Boost level 1, which can be potentially level 7 when we're wearing the Glider Mantle, increasing this build's defense as well as elemental defenses. You have Airborne level 1, Fortify level 1, which is a useful skill for the Guiding Lands, as fainting isn't really an issue in the Guiding Lands. Every time you faint, when you come back to camp, the Fortify buff will kick in, increasing our raw attack and defense. This buff can be applied up to 2 times. You have Geologist level 1, which is an odd skill for all this build, but is useful. Geologist allows us to loot the monster materials that drop off from a monster twice instead of just once, at least from the high tier monsters. And then finally for the skills, when we're wearing the Fireproof or whatever elemental mantle we're using, reducing the stamina consumption of this build. Finally for the set bonus, you'll have the Safi'Jiiva Divinity True Gaia's Veil. This is a buff that kicks in whenever we're wearing mantles, giving us a ton of quality of life skills including Tremor Resistance level 3, pretty much allowing us to ignore all tremor attacks and effects. You have Earplugs level 5, Maximum Windproof and Flinch Free, ultimately making hunts feel a lot more easier than they are. So there you have it. As you can see, it's a decent build that makes use of the entire Safi'Jiiva armor set. But of course there are pros and cons. The biggest pros for this build is it's an all-round build, combining DPS skills, defensive skills and quality of life skills, especially thanks to True Gaia's Veil. It all makes for comfy hunts. On top of that, the True Gaia's Veil itself is a wonderful buff and thus a pro all to itself, providing us a ton of quality of life skills so long as we're managing our mantles correctly. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, this is a decent build to use in the Guiding Lands thanks to it being able to make use of all the associated Guiding Land skills, including Part Breaker, Fortify and Geologist. But of course there are cons. The one major con for this build is unfortunately its over-reliance on mantles. If you're not a fan of mantles or don't have mantles that can be socketed with jewels yet, then this build may not be for you. But if you're looking for a comfy build to use in the Guiding Lands to farm the area with little stress, then I would highly recommend this one. So there we have it, those are the endgame builds that I used for the Insect Glaive pre-Safi'Jiiva. Now of course there are more builds to come, especially with the new season on the horizon, which will feature everything from Safi'Jiiva to Elatrion. And as I always say, you don't have to use what is shown in these videos. Use what you want to use, as most tasks in Monster Hunter World Iceborne can be taken on with any weapon or gear set. But I hope you found this video helpful or informative, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you builds that I use for the Insect Glaive in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.